The current planning strategy for metropolitan Melbourne, Melbourne 2030, sets out 9 key desired results for the growth of Melbourne to the year 2030. Melbourne is Australia's fastest growing city, leading the nation's population growth for 11 years in a row. As of May 2013, the population of Melbourne is estimated to be 4.25 million, with that number increasing by 1,500 people a week, equal to the combined growth of Brisbane, Adelaide, Gold Coast, Newcastle and Canberra. This growth has ultimately impacted on the residential property market in Melbourne. The following debate will examine the viability of the Melbourne 2030 plan, taking into consideration population growth and its effect on the residential property market in Melbourne. Participating in today's debate will be Alex Martini, planner, myself, Ramo Ambala, the property developer, Michael Gekas, the economist, and Jess Smarkus, community representative.
The need for development of new urban areas to accommodate for the predicted growth in population in Melbourne has been recognised. The Melbourne Metropolitan Strategy 2030 aims to see Victoria as a network of cities, towns and regions which depend on each other and also share growth with regional and rural Victoria. Key planning initiatives include the implementation of growth boundaries, which will affect planning decisions in order to protect rural vistas such as Yarra Valley, Dandenongs and Mornington Peninsula. Other initiatives also included the protection of 12 green wedges and 10 new parks. Initially, Melbourne 2030 had predicted that the population of metropolitan area is expected to increase by 1 million people. However, since the scheme was first created in 2001, Melbourne's population projections have increased dramatically to up to 7 million by that time. In response to the increased population forecasts and increased demand for housing, the population increase has caused the planning scheme to be altered by abandoning the urban growth boundary in the city's north and west and has also compromised green wedges. This growth is an encouraging and progressive step in the right direction as it allows for expansion of metropolitan Melbourne, which not only benefits and accommodates for the current rising population but for many years to come. There are several growth areas which has been rezoned to the new urban growth zone to speed up the master planning of Melbourne's new communities. Direct development to growth areas that can be provided with public transport and other local regional infrastructure. In order to achieve objectives of Melbourne 2030, it's encouraged for new households to locate to metropolitan strategic redevelopment sites which accommodate new residential housing near activity centres. Areas with good access to services, facilities and public transport are favoured locations for high density housing. Many new dwellings also continue to be built in established residential areas. The aim of a multicultural metropolitan area will be reinforced through the use of central activity districts.
Yep, shouldn't be a problem, mate. Mr. Triggeroff, I'll see you tomorrow, mate. All right. The release of the ABS population figures showed the cities of Wyndham, Whittlesea, Casey and Melton were the highest population increases, supporting the recent decision by the Victorian Treasurer Michael O'Brien to limit the first home buyers grant to new buildings to stimulate the industry and create employment. Currently, there are 1.6 million private dwellings in Melbourne, of which about 15% are apartments. The industry in Victoria at large directly employs around 310,000 full-time employees, contributes around 12% of the state's gross GDP and 4.6 billion in taxes to all tiers of the government. The population pressure does not come without the challenges to provide infrastructure, and therefore myself and I'm sure others are urging governments to introduce government-backed infrastructure bonds to put Australian savings to work. Regarding the future, these figures suggest we're going to need around 760,000 new dwellings built in Melbourne in less than 40 years, of which close to 250,000 could be apartments. Our changing lifestyle means more Victorians are going to trade their quarter-acre block for a balcony, and the percentage of apartments in Melbourne is likely to grow closer to 30%. As a point of comparison, currently 25% of all dwellings in Sydney are apartments. We already know that Melbourne has been voted as one of the world's most livable cities, but in order to maintain this mantle, our federal and state governments, as well as local councils, will have an important role to play by investing in key infrastructure in a timely manner. Melbourne will start to look like many other large international cities with high-rise apartment buildings dotting the landscape, thus becoming a more compact city. So what does this mean for property investors like myself? Well, Melbourne's strong population growth, together with the increasing affluence of its residents, coupled with the fact that many of them will have to live in the same suburbs close to where all the action is, will ensure that the value of well-located properties will keep increasing over the long term. The trick will be to own the type of property that will be in continuous strong demand by a large demographic of these new residents. And for many, this is likely to be the well-located apartments. As my friends that I was just speaking to you on the phone, Harry Triggerbuff once said to me, there are two things that can greatly improve the economy. They are immigration and housing.
Oh hey, didn't see you there. Under current economic circumstances, the housing market is in a strong position to cater for the needs of Melburnians. The economic fundamentals for recovery in the property market are in place, with low interest rates, high levels of housing affordability, improving consumer confidence, and ongoing solid population growth. The property industry in Victoria is a key contributor to the Victorian economic growth, contributing around 12% of the state's gross domestic product. Melbourne's population added over 77,000 people in the year to June 2012, fueled mainly by overseas migration. This growth is set to continue. The increase in population has stimulated development, increasing demand for a variety of dwellings. As the property market grows, productivity, wealth and prosperity are achieved. The increased population in Melbourne has resulted in increased demand for housing. The latest data shows that Melbourne dwelling prices increased by 2.5% over the last quarter and 4.9% since May last year. Supply of residential dwellings is at a paradox. Currently there is a shortage of well-located desirable established apartments and houses in Melbourne, yet there is a surplus of new apartments and houses and land packages vacant, not able to find buyers. Planners and developers must be proactive in shaping the housing landscape for the population, taking into consideration population projections, economic conditions, and the Melbourne 2030 plan. In doing so, the supply of housing will better meet the demand of the population, maximising productivity and resources within our economy. Desired results within the Melbourne 2030 plan are to create a more compact city with better management of metropolitan growth. Over the last decade, Melbourne's boundaries have expanded, resulting in uniform urban sprawl. From an economics perspective, this type of growth is expensive and unsustainable, as housing in new suburbs requires new infrastructure to support them, including roads, services and facilities. This infrastructure is currently available within existing suburbs and should be fully utilised. State policy backs this, supporting high-density Melbourne and high-rises because of limits to unsustainable urban growth, making Victoria a state of cities rather than a city-state. Activity centres identified in the Melbourne 2030 strategy are an example of accommodating increased population growth through the use of excellent infrastructure and location, relieving pressure of urban sprawl. In conclusion, as Melbourne population is expected to grow, the property industry needs to cater for the residential needs of that population. With the guidelines of the 2030 plan, which take into consideration the economic benefits of higher density Melbourne.
We've heard from the property developer Donny Balla that he believes we should continue to build up inner Melbourne. As a community representative of Melbourne, I strongly disagree with this. Did you know that the state government is planning on housing an extra 1 million people in Melbourne within the next 20 years? If these 1 million people are crowded into our Melbourne CBD and city fringe areas, think about the congestion and overcrowding that will occur. Issues of transportation infrastructure, water, health and education services and air quality are being ignored by the government in its drive for rapid population growth. The general community and local councils have largely rejected high-density residential policies in the past. High-rise living has not been accepted in Melbourne, especially in the suburbs. In order to welcome more people into Melbourne and expand our residential housing without posing these issues, the most beneficial way to do so is by continuing to build outward into the urban growth areas. By moving outward, it not only allows for families to have their own land, house and backyards, but also allows for much space and healthy fresh air that we need. Along with the benefits of owning your own house, purchasing in this area also reduces the costs of buying residential property. This is what many Australians are looking for. The Australian Centre on Quality of Life has developed a personal wellbeing index that measures the perceived wellbeing and quality of life of population. Residents in these communities record an average of 79% on the Personal Wellbeing Index, compared to the national average of 76.4%. As a community representative, I say there's no doubt that being part of a friendly, connected community such as these is good for our health and happiness. So by continuing to build outwards, we'll not only be shaping our communities and livability, but our environment too.